Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start our event. Welcome to our event, Diversity and Inclusion in Medical Technology Innovation. And this event is brought to you by a joint effort of the Medical Industry Leadership Institute at the Carlson School of Management and the Minnesota chapter of Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. Very, very important also that this is such a collaborative event and receives the support and enthusiasm from multiple other centers at the University of Minnesota, including the Earl E. Balkan Medical Devices Center, Holmes Center for Entrepreneurship at the Carlson School of Management, Institute for Engineering and Medicine at the College of Science and Engineering, as well as the University of Minnesota's Technology Commercialization Office. In this event, our goal is to bring awareness to the lack of diversity and inclusion in the medical technology space, specifically addressing innovation, challenges, barriers, and what are we looking forward to? How can we encourage innovation within underrepresented groups and diversify the pool of innovators? And what are some of these barriers and how can we overcome them? My name is Pınar Karacamandic. I'm a professor at the Carlson School of Management in the Department of Finance, and I'm also the academic director of the Medical Industry Leadership Institute. We are joined here with a distinguished group of panelists that I would like to do quick introductions, and then I will defer to my colleague Siata for moderating the session. So first, I'm going to start with Dr. Siata Dambar, who's a physician at mHealth Fairview, and she is the Minnesota chapter leader for the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. Dr. Dambar is a fellowship-trained sports medicine physician with a deep interest in medical technology and remote patient monitoring to address health inequities and drive lasting behavior change with the goal of reversing chronic disease. Next, we have Kathy Toon, who's the board chair, CEO, and CFO of Odonota Health Incorporated. Kathy is a healthcare executive with over 25 years of investing and business experience. Her extensive background includes venture capital and growth equity investing and includes M&A, transaction expertise, corporate strategy, business development, sales and marketing strategy, and reimbursement strategy. She's also an active corporate board director, including leading and participation on audit, finance, and compensation committees. Again, as I mentioned, she's the CFO and CEO of Odonota Health, a development stage maternal and fetal health committee. She's also a partner with Capita 3, a seed stage venture capital firm focused on investing in women-led startups focused on transforming health and healthcare. Next, we have Kwame Almer, who is a venture partner with Wavemaker 360 Health, and he's also the founding member of MedTech Color. Kwame serves as the principal at Almer Ventures, a regulatory strategy consulting firm, and he brings nearly 20 years of experience evaluating medical technologies in the government and serving in senior operating roles at medical device companies. Mr. Almer previously served as Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance at Implant Direct, and he has also served in progressive leadership roles at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And next we have Marta Sewell, who's an executive in residence at the Discovery Launchpad of the University of Minnesota's Office of Technology Commercialization. Marta's 25 plus years in medtech product development and business management has encompassed a range of clinical areas and therapies with extensive experience in the development of new medical technologies. She leads teams that successfully commercialized over 10 major new products in infusion therapy, in critical care medicine, as well as chronic and home care. And her business unit developed and launched innovative medical devices that have leading market positions within their respective categories and contributed to significant growth for Smiths Medical. As I mentioned, currently Marta is an executive advisor and consultant. And on a personal note, she is my instructor at a value proposition design course that I'm personally taking as an entrepreneur at the University of Minnesota. So I welcome all our participants, and I defer to Dr. Siata Dambar to moderate this excellent conversation I'm so much looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karacamandic. And thank you everyone that has joined. please take advantage of the chat feature, drop in some questions for us. We'll sort of have a dialogue, 45 minutes or so, and then we'll try to get to some Q&A. So by any means, please do take advantage of that so that we can get some participation and get your questions answered. I'd also like to say thank you also to the panelists. I'm humbled. I think I counted over 60 years worth of experience in this space. So I'm super pumped to sort of gain my knowledge, sort of increase my understanding, and see how we can move the needle when it comes to diversity and inclusion in medtech. So thank you very much for being here. So as we mentioned, the goal hopefully is to sort of address where we are, current state, move into what can we do to increase access or increase diversity, and then are there barriers that we have some clever ideas to sort of navigate through. So Kathy, if you don't mind if I start with you, in your experience, and I guess I was looking a little bit at Capita 3 and sort of that unique niche, what does the data say currently about diversity in medtech innovation, and how is Capita addressing that, Capita 3 addressing that?
Yeah, so, and as you said, Capita 3 is focused on investing in women-led businesses. So we have that lens kind of as we look at the world. The world, I would say, is, it's a little bit, it's unfortunate that the numbers haven't changed as dramatically as I think we'd all like them to be changing. There's still pretty low numbers of entrepreneurs that are diverse in the world of medtech. We're going to get into the reasons behind that, I'm sure, as we have this conversation, but the numbers are still pretty low. I mean, women in particular only are founders in about 2% of companies, and attract only about 2 to 2.5% of equity in the United States. So there's progress being made, certainly, but the numbers are definitely not where we'd like them to be. And if you think about diversity as more than just gender-based, it's every pocket of diversity has challenges, and it's nowhere near where we would like it to be. But that said, I think there's some dynamics that are kind of at play here that are making a difference. It's taking time, but and we're going to get there. On the flip side of that, I would say, and several of you are at the university. When you look at what's very promising, I think, is when you look across the research base, the diversity is extremely high. And that is the feeder of what the world, will be in healthcare and in medtech. So that's a very promising metric that is helpful, I think, in the dynamic.
That's great to mention. And maybe, Martha, if I could just jump a little bit, because you talk about, at the university, because I think, Martha, you're involved in that capacity at the university. What are you seeing on your side as far as diversity and whether it's gender-based or race-based, as far as from that perspective?
Coming in through the Techcom office and the Discovery Launchpad, we're seeing an increase, certainly, both in gender and across race. Not as much as I would like to see within an academic organization, but certainly better than I see actually in the commercial environment. So
okay.
Making progress, but I still think that need to reach down into organizations and reach across to educate and inform about what the opportunities exists.
Yeah. And Kwame, if I could jump a little bit to MedTech Color, because Kathy mentioned, obviously diversity is more than just gender-based. So could you speak a little bit about MedTech Color and what what spurred that institution, and what are you seeing in the way of diversity?
There's a little bit of a Minnesota story here. So early on in my career at the FDA, I went on a site visit to a large medical device company based in Minnesota. And I met with many senior leaders, and the highest ranking leader of color had a title, I believe, of manager. And her eyes lit up when she saw me. And I kind of wondered, why is this such a thing? But over the years, I come to realize, having worked at the FDA, interfaced with hundreds of CEOs, vice presidents of regulatory, sometimes commercial leaders, and then moving into roles in the private sector, there's a consistent theme of underrepresentation from early stage to large corporate organizations. But the seed was planted there. I met at a coffee at AvaMed with Michelle McMurray-Heath in 2016, and we talked about the opportunity to build community. with the people that were in the industry. And over those years, after focus group sessions and planning sessions, a formal nonprofit was born in 2018 to bring together people in this space, advanced thought leadership among leaders of color, and also provide mechanisms to increase the number of people who enter and stay in the industry. And we're thinking a lot about how capital can help drive that. So that's our story in a nutshell.
And over time, since 2018, since that MedTech color was formed, how have you seen the landscape change? And do you think it's been a consistent growth, or have we leveled off, and then kind of give us a sense of what's coming around the corner?
We believe we've developed a home, a community, a Switzerland, a neutral place where if you're at Medtronic or St. Jude or at a startup or a VC in this space, you can come. It started with our first breakfast. Michelle McMurray-Heath was a keynote speaker. We had 75 people attend. The next year we had a little over 150 attend our breakfast. And this last breakfast, 2020, we had 300 registrants for our event. So we've seen some steady growth. Having said that, we know that the numbers industry-wide still need to grow significantly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe, Martha, if you could address that a little bit, because I think, as Kwame is saying, we're seeing some growth. Kathy alluded to, at least from a gender perspective, the percentages are fairly low. What ideas or what have you come across as far as increasing not just the numbers, but also the diversity of sort of underrepresented individuals that are coming into MedTech?
Really good question. It was funny, as a part of preparing for this conversation today, I kind of went back to think about my own experiences and to really kind of research around the area to say, where are the opportunities? And I think it falls in a couple of different areas, and it falls on all of us. I think there's the first part of saying, what does the process look like? How do you, particularly on the innovation side, I'm going to say innovation and then MedTech more broadly. What does it look like? How do you have to get into the network, learn about what's happening, learn about the process, in order to build both relationships with people that are in the innovation and finance and the innovation space in MedTech, as well as the financing side of that innovation, and then how to be a part of it, right? So there's the learning process, and then there is the active reaching out into the community to bring people in and to say, here's what's happening. So for example, Kwame, you used the example of your organization. And I thought about, why could we not do something like that at the annual Medical Alley meeting in Minnesota, or the big MedTech conference that's here in May, where we actually create a place for people to come and join so that they can meet and network and get some education about where to go. We have to make those conferences affordable, right? Because for a lot of us, companies pay it or our business pays it, but you have to make it affordable, maybe as a part of the day, to come and have that experience and really start to build the networks. Because I think once you start that, I think everybody that's here today on the call is probably pretty highly motivated to continue to sort of follow those leads where they lead.
That's a great point. There was a question that came in, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it was, the notion that, do you have to be sort of that higher income bracket, or, have to be at a certain level in order to get into this space? So I think, Martha, your point is a great one. How do we make this more financially accessible and that sort of thing?
I think if I can add on, Siada, particularly if you are early in your career, right, to make it financially accessible. But I think once you get in, yes, I mean, truly, if you're going to be an innovator and drive your own business, yes, you're going to have to do some bootstrapping and come up with some of your own capital. But I think the key really is accessing the network and understanding how it works. And we need to be really more consciously competent about it.
Yeah, I think even in sort of trying to get SOAP started in Minnesota, just navigating what's available, I think can be challenging. And networking, I think, is a huge, huge piece of that, is just sort of getting out there and having that conversation. Kathy, if I could ask you a little bit from, again, either institution, whether it's Capita 3 or is it Odonta Health, I believe it is. how are you guys addressing this gap as far as diversity and increasing the numbers and those sorts of things?
So there are so many factors that seem to play into this issue, and some network has been mentioned, of course, and the earliest stages of a company are often it's angel backed and friends and family, or the little bit of a bigger network and so when you're a first time founder, when your network isn't necessarily as established, when you're younger, probably as you might be as a first time founder, you have a lot of things that you're trying to solve for to try to get that, get people to the table to invest in the company and in you. And so, it takes a lot of work to get the networks established. And it takes action. I think Kwame's group is doing probably a great job of this action on the part of the network to open itself to people, right? That's an active decision the network has to make, and they're not always doing that. So Capita 3 and Odonata. So Capita 3, we're out looking for deals all the time, and those deals, we're just scouring the marketplace for deals all over the place. We're across the country. Expanding our network, trying to talk to various investors who might have the same kind of viewpoint as we do across the country, looking for deals. So that's a big part of what we do. We're just closing on our 7th deal on Monday. Also a female-backed company in the digital mental health space. Odonata is a female-backed company too. It's a female CEO. Myself, a female CFO. I was actually also the lead investor in the first round of the capital of the company, and probably, I think I just did the numbers, 45% of the equity is owned by women in the company. So pretty rare, but the company was very purposeful in not being, we tried not to be reactionary and to kind of play the standard game of looking for, I don't know what's the best way to say it. It's going to sound a little negative probably, but not looking for the older, established, 60-year-old, almost retired executive to come and look and sit on the board, which is oftentimes what happens in these situations. We tried to make sure we looked younger, looked more broadly at the marketplace to keep the company more diverse along the way.
So I really love what Kathy said, and I want to talk about a couple of experiences we've had at MedTech Color, and I believe it happens at MedTech Women. We get inbound something like this: VCX wants to diversify the types of companies they look at and see. Do you know of early stage companies that are managed by people of color? Then we send them some names. Or early stage company X has a job opening for a senior engineer. They want to diversify their candidate pool. Can you share this position description? And we gladly do it. I think the tricky thing is the trust in the network to refer and bring on board members, because that's an intimate, usually 1 to 2 degrees of separation type of relationship. But we are working on that. And I think that's another immense opportunity. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything Kathy said. And those are some discrete, specific possibilities to change the face of early stage companies.
And Kwame and Seata, can I add something to that? Because you're absolutely right. As making that referral is based on your relationship to that person, so they better be a good one. For those of you who are listening, this is when you can take little steps like volunteering with the local trade associations, whether that's Medical Alley or MedTech Women or any of the conferences, or even your clinical societies, to begin to build that network to be visible. I even got that feedback when I left a more established company to step into the space of startups. People said you need to show up just to volunteer and be present so people can see what you can do.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. Sort of, I guess that's one barrier, I guess, that I have seen, and I think all 3 of you have spoken to that we really do look to refer within our network, and depending on how deep and wide that network is, then it sort of tends to perpetuate the lack of diversity. So are there other barriers that you guys have seen? And maybe Kwame, you can go first, as far as, you know, are there things that are holding this movement back, and how do we identify those? And then are there strategies to overcome them, you know, along those lines?
Yeah, and I have a bias, no pun intended, around capital and the power of capital and incentives. So some things that I think are barriers are the young and sometimes even not so young early stage medtech founders that are people of color, and raising that family and friends round, raising that seed round. So to address that, funds that have a lens on diversity, funds that negotiate in the term sheet diversity as part of the hiring approach for that company, that would work. And specific pitch competitions focused on diverse founding teams. We're launching one for March of 2021, where we're going to be providing 100K of non-dilutive capital and in-kind services to companies that are run and managed by African Americans and Latinx medtech companies. This is a modest step. I think we need $100 million funds with this type of lens to really move the needle in any significant way. But these are some things that work. On the corporate side, an organization that I think is doing great work and has been is SMDP, where they take these amazingly talented, highly educated students and match them with mentors at large organizations, large companies, and serve as a formal pipeline to land that first job at a Medtronic or a Boston Scientific. And finally, incentivize managers to diversify their candidate pools with cash and stock options. It's been done at Kaiser Permanente. The CEO of Stryker went from probably less than 10% diversity in his board to over 80% diversity in his board because he was motivated to do it and just have that trickle down through the organization.
Martha or Kathy, anything to add as far as from a barrier standpoint? Others that you've identified, and then any ideas around how do we start to chip away at those?
Well, I think Kwame is exactly right. The power of the capital is massive. And I think we're seeing that some of that shift in capital lens, gender lens or race lens investing occurring for sure. What we are seeing though is a lot of small seed funds, right? And you need to start somewhere, and that's a good place to start because that's where the entrepreneurs are starting. But you need the big checks too, because the companies need to grow and they need to expand and have more capital. And so you need to have, unfortunately, the history behind the larger pools of capital, private equity and venture capital, tend to be very similar across the board. It's a lot of white men. And so and when you have that background as a fund, that's what you tend to back as an investor. That's just the way life is. You tend to back that type of person, and you tend to back that type of person where you live also. So Silicon Valley, of course, tends to be where the money is. So I think what we need to see, and I think we are starting to, because we just now, I think a week ago saw, it was either Harvard or Yale endowment said now they are going to be changing their filter for how they look at potential new venture funds or existing venture funds. And if the venture funds don't change their partner structure and their sort of the diversity of their partnership, they are not going to be getting money from, and it must have been Yale, one of those two, but they're massively important in the limited partner base. So the money that flows into the venture funds. So you've got to get it coming from that big, powerful pool of capital to push it down to the funds. So then these seed funds, as they grow companies, can have the next level of capital to hand it off to. So that's good to see. We need more of it. We saw 2 different investment banks. It's probably been more now that have taken on the same set of rules as the state of California, that's saying if you don't have females on your board, a female or maybe more, and they need to broaden that, of course. But if California said a couple of years ago, you have to have a female on your board if you're a public company. That made a pretty big change in boards. And now a couple investment banks have also taken that on and said, if in order for us to even think about taking you public, we don't care where you are. We're not going to do it unless your board is more diverse. So these things are really, really important, because that's where the little companies become the big companies, and that's where they need to go to make it really powerful.
I tell you, that's encouraging. That I think there's some movement on, again, like you're saying, top down, right? Sort of the larger group sort of mandating that we need to really make this a high priority and putting some systems in place to ensure that happens. Anything to add at all, Martha, from your perspective, as far as any other barriers that you see?
I'll probably tend to focus in the building the base, because I think the more that we have entrance into the pool, the more opportunities we can create. So I think the things that I have seen, I'll go back and say, I think the big conferences need to work harder in the educational area about opportunities, both from an entrepreneurship standpoint and innovation, as well as access to the companies and understanding what's out there. So people who are graduating either undergraduate, MBAs, graduate schools from an engineering and talent standpoint, and physicians and clinicians, what's available from a career standpoint. I also think from an innovation perspective, for example, the university is doing a lot of this, where we're breaking down the different pieces to medtech innovation to make the bites smaller, right? What does regulatory look like? What does financing look like? What does your legal requirements look like? And to understand, just, it's not an MBA program. It's on between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. About every 3 months, there's something that's available that really gives you a bite of the apple to say, okay, I understand this. This is not so complex. It's hard work, but it's not so complex. And here's what I can do. And we have to keep doing that.
Agreed. Be sure, for those that are listening, if you have questions, definitely drop them. I think we have a separate Q&A section. There's also a chat feature. So by all means, go ahead and add that in there. I'll pull one question that's been asked. So we've got Essa Mohammed, who is actually doing he's a Bush Fellow under Dr. Karaja Mandich, and he's been involved in research. So I'll just sort of read his question so that I don't paraphrase, inappropriately. So he was saying, I'm fortunate to become a Bush Fellow this year under the mentorship of Dr. Karaja Mandich, with the goals of increasing the number of women and racial ethnic minorities in medical device development and in clinical trials. As I'm developing my leadership in this space, what advice would you give me and others to ensure that we research this goal in a tangible manner? So I think, I can't remember, maybe someone commented very early about research. So I'll start with, let's say, Kathy, do you mind just sort of fielding that initially? What advice would you have for Dr. Mohammed?
Yeah, that's a very laudable goal. I applaud you. That's amazing, and I'm glad that you got funded for this important initiative. Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot of that, a lot of the things that might be a part of this already. I would say, and I would come back to network a little bit. I mean, the development of a network in the field you want to get into is critical, and that network would be it depends on what the person wants, but in the case of if you want to start a company, then you need to be meeting a lot of investors, and you need to be meeting a lot of entrepreneurs, and really understanding, first of all, understanding what they do and trying to form those, form your background, but also, help them, let them help you, or find people who can help you, right? To leverage all of that into something more, and have them help you make a plan around how to get there. build the skill sets, build your advisory. You almost have to have your own advisory board, I think, in order to make this work. And you can do that through mentorships and networks. And I mean, even my own background, when I transitioned from doing scientific research to doing investing, and that took that kind of approach too. So I spent 2 years at business school, and during that time, I made an effort. My effort was to identify as many entrepreneurs in the field as I could, to sort of learn their stories, learn the background. And so it took a lot of work and a planning, but I think it's that's kind of part of what the process can look like, I think, in a program like that.
Thank you for that. Kwame or Martha, anything to add for Dr. Muhammad or similar folks that are on the research side and guidance for them as they?
If I understand it, you're working on research that addresses health equity in the medical device industry, at least in part. And that in and of itself, I think, is an area that is getting more traction. And as you refine your hypotheses or deliverables from this research to engender its utility, interviews with potential consumers and users of it would be ideal. From large corporates, I know Boston Scientific has a long-standing effort called Close the Gap. If they could be a user or consumer of this information, if I understand what you're working on, I think that would be great. And it's an immediate connection with a major player in the ecosystem, as one example.
Great. And if I could be maybe a little bit selfish, so as a physician who has an interest, and then also as I meet other physicians, I've heard I've heard really key things. One is networking, making the time, sort of diversify the folks that we network with. And then capital is one thing, right? Sort of taking advantage, or if we can get set up or hooked up or network in a fashion that allows us access to capital. Any other thoughts or guidance from a physician entrepreneurial standpoint, where if a physician is still doing clinical medicine but has an interest or has an idea, part of this is what I'm trying to develop with SOAP, but any other thoughts around that specifically for physician entrepreneurs that are looking to get into med tech?
Can I tackle this one, Siada? This is, so there are a couple of different areas I would suggest, and it can be applied to almost anybody, but I think physicians and clinicians come with a unique set of capital of your own, right? Which is deep, rich domain insight into your clinical specialty. So you never underestimate that, okay? Because in providing, companies in the med tech space, whether they are startups or established companies, are always looking for clinician perspective across a whole host of topics, right? Everything from social determinants of health to the neurosciences. And as clinicians and professionals, you all can provide insight in one of those areas, and to be sure to leverage that where you can, number one, so you get some visibility, right? And you leverage that experience, you make contacts with those companies that can come back to pay dividends for you if and when you develop a concept or an idea. And then your ability to ask for help from those companies or individuals, that's sort of your give and get. I give an example. I have several clinicians that I worked with over the years that I have asked on more than a number of occasions for assistance, even recently. And one of the clinicians, who's a pediatric intensive care doc at Hopkins, sent back and he says, I'm working on a project and I need somebody to look at my pitch deck. And I'm like, oh, okay, I owe him because he helped me on something else. So I did. I went through the pitch deck with him. I provided some comments back. I could articulate stuff for him and he can move on from there. So I see it as sort of the give and get.
Great,
so
thank you for that. Yeah.
Can I share a bit? So earlier this morning, I was talking to a CEO, African-American, Patrick Hines. He runs a company called Functional Fluidics, oversubscribed on a raise north of $1 million. And he raised it from African-American, in part from African-American, ultra-high net worth individuals, clinicians, executives, et cetera. Hampton grad, I'm not going to tell all his business, but some of his fraternity brothers contributed to this. And I think that is the ideal scenario for a leader of color. He is not 21 years old. Your average age for a medtech CEO is not going to be 22. And he made the jump to full-time CEO, not in the beginning of starting this company, but when the economics made sense. And I think that's another very consistent story for African Americans, because in general, there is no net. So when you make that jump, you have to make sure that your family economics are such that you absolutely have runway to be at this for at least a year, raising capital, et cetera. But I bring up Patrick because he is probably the poster child for all the things that can go right as an early stage diagnostic company CEO of color, where the networks open up. And the last thing I'll say about networks also is tapping into ultra high net worth folks in the African American community is different, because those people have to manage risk in a way that other communities don't. Because even ultra high net worth individuals sometimes have very little net, or they're supporting family members, et cetera. So the dynamic is different, but it can be a wonderful thing when it works out well. So exciting story.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Congrats. So maybe one other concept, and then we'll kind of roll into questions a bit. And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm just wondering if there's anything left in that we can squeeze out of you guys a little bit. So on the way of innovative incentives, and sometimes incentives has a bad connotation to it, but what, are you aware of anything that's out there as far as incentives that are going to, again, push people to place diversity and innovation diversity and inclusion at the top of their priority? I think we certainly have touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to circle back and see if there's anything left on the table that the three of you can think of. And then we'll be sure to get to questions after that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've talked about a little bit where some of the institutions are starting to put filters on, which is a really positive thing. Filters on their money, so that'll help. I believe that'll help in the long run. The state of Minnesota, they, as a part of their angel tax credit, they do segregate their pool of capital for their angel tax credit into two pools. One is for all comers and one is for women and minority-owned business. So they split that pool in half. That's a positive thing for sure. I haven't seen any metrics to know exactly what that means at the end of the day, but it's good that they're applying the filter. I don't think I have any other specific examples I think of right at the moment.
Kathy, you made me think of Pledge LA here in LA. And it's an organization where you have to pledge a commitment, whether you be at a startup, a VC fund, to support more diverse companies. And they're actually raising a fund to invest in companies based in a neighborhood in LA called South LA, where they can take advantage of Opportunity Zone tax credits. So there's that tax incentive that I had forgotten about. I think you'll get a range of opinions. Some people view opportunity zones as sweeteners, but there has been a fair amount of activity in the investor community, real estate investing community, to grow in these neighborhoods that have opportunity zones. So that's one potential incentive.
And lastly, mine are on the smaller, probably early startup side, is we're seeing more of the pitch fests, the competitions, whether they're local or national, starting to carve out segments, both by clinical area as well as by women-led and minority-led organizations. And so doing research around those, even when you're looking for early funding, are certainly worth the effort.
I almost wish I was taking notes, because there's been some really good nuggets on what opportunities are out there. So hopefully somebody's taking notes, or maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll send an email after to the three and just say, can you restate some of these sort of points as far as what options are out there? Because there's one question that came in that said, are there any organizations that support minority innovators? And I think, MedTech Color certainly has, the opportunity to sort of connect people, right? If you reach out to MedTech Color, that's certainly an opportunity. Any others that you guys are aware of specifically that are supporting minority innovators?
There's the National Society of Black Engineers. I don't know exactly all the programming they have under their umbrella. It's a huge nonprofit. I can only imagine there's some support for entrepreneurs in that space. It's the largest organization working with Black engineers, so there must be some activity there to some degree.
I haven't researched this yet, and I don't know, Kwame or Kathy, if Advomed and some of the large national medtech trade associations don't have something going on, but I just haven't tapped into them in 5 years, so certainly worth a look.
I haven't looked at it either. It'd be an interesting thing to evaluate though, because it's, of course, that's the biggest network of all in medtech is AvaMed and MDMI.
Yeah, and AvaMed recently, 2 weeks ago, released a set of principles that I am confident will turn into more action-oriented steps, principles around diversity, equity, inclusion. So the CEO is committed to this. He's made some significant statements after Black Lives Matter, and the chief financial officer who leads the program, which is called AvaMed Advanced, is intensely focused on industry-wide solutions. They just released those principles. I think that's going to turn into action shortly. And they have been a major partner and sponsor they're actually a sponsor also, one of the sponsors of MedTech Color. So that's another organization that's focused on it.
Great. And again, if there's any other questions, be sure to pop them in. I'll sort of toss out one more. I would love to hear each of you just comment a little bit on, in your respective spaces and with the respective organizations that you work with, are there goals in place, right? Have you sat down and said, okay, we want to be here in 6 months or a year when it comes to diversity and inclusion? And if so, are you willing to sort of share what does the next year look like, and how do we, how does that positively impact things? Have you sat down and put those projections in place? And I'll go, not to put you on the spot, Martha, but I'll start with you, Martha.
I knew that was going to be me. Yes, and sort of. And by that, I mean the team within Techcom is doing a real good sweep across both looking at IP registrations, as well as those that are going on further to license their technology and then go through the Discovery Launchpad to understand kind of where we are, right? And while I said we're not as far as I would like to be, I think they've made considerable progress. And I think with that, we'll be building more incentives around, for example, we're raising really putting a focus on our business advisory group that supports those individuals by reaching beyond sort of their traditional networks to find more diversity, both in women and people of color, to act as mentors and sponsors. So starting along that path, for sure.
Thank you. Kathy, anything on the horizon from your groups?
Yeah, so for Capita 3, I mean, as I've said, our filter is investing in women-led businesses. We continue to do that. That's and we're, as I said, we're going to be investing in our 6th company now soon. We've actually done this, I wouldn't say it's a goal, but we do take a look and ask our companies, what is the diversity of the companies that we're invested in? And we've done a survey. We've only done one survey so far, and I'm looking forward to doing another. It's my sense that the companies that are led by women have a much more diverse base of employees than companies that are not led by women. So I'm excited to kind of do that survey again and see what we find in the future on that score. And I wasn't surprised by that actually, but it was kind of confirmatory. And then for Odonata, I mean, Odonata is, we are, you know, an early stage company. We only have 4 people at the company. We have the company is focused on maternal fetal health. And so, and maternal fetal health is a very, very critical area of healthcare in the African-American community. The metrics are terrible. And so we're spending a lot of time actually making sure that we have all the right representation of the voices that we need to hear from in the various communities as we think about our product and the needs in the space.
Siata, there are some questions from the chat, if you would like me to read. One of the questions that came was, I'll just put them out there and you can sort of choose how to address them. One of them is more about the education space. Can I hear about the educational and skill requirements that can lead people to this space? So that's more on the education. The second one is more about, do you feel that the major players are doing enough to further inclusion in medtech from a patient perspective in the US and globally? How can we encourage companies to do more?
Wow, those are 2 great questions. Wow. How about from an education standpoint? Let's see, Martha, do you want to lean on that one as far as, you know, how do we, what is the pathway, I guess, is what I heard from that question.
So I think there are 2 components. There is sort of traditional education, right? In terms of both high school, college, community college, and then graduate school. And I think there are tons of pathways through there, whether it's the sciences, engineering, some combination of both, and perhaps on the engineering, if you're getting into the technical side, getting a master's exposure at some point is helpful. But I think there's also sort of the informal education of, and again, I'll keep going back to saying, how do we, and maybe it's up to us to create that list, how do you plug into these organizations to attend meetings, webinars, and conferences to learn more about the spaces that you're interested in? I think we assume that, you know, I collect my blog lists and daily emails from all my different areas, and I assume other people do, but sometimes people just don't know, right? So how do you make that list to make people aware?
Pinar, do you mind, will you reread the, from the patient perspective? What was the one that had to do with?
Yeah, so it's, I think it also maybe relates to Essa's earlier question about sort of how do you diversify the pool for the innovation space. Like I think Essa was talking about it more in the clinical trials. This question seems to be more broad. Do you feel that the major players are doing enough to further inclusion in medtech from a patient perspective? And how can we encourage companies to do more?
Yeah, I was either Kathy or Kwame, if you guys want to jump in. I see both of you went off mute, so I'll let maybe both of you can comment briefly.
Yeah, my frank reaction is, I don't know how, no, there's interest, and I don't know if it's a matter of incentives. I mentioned Boston Scientific that has the Close the Gap initiative and has had it for years. I know of other companies that are interested in the issue of health equity, but I don't see a groundswell of large medical device companies operationalizing health equity. I see statements after Black Lives Matter and some activity, but it's not revolutionary. It's not a step function in terms of activity and health equity. For me, that's my observation of what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, no, I would have to agree with that. I mean, there have to be, I mean, to make it really happen, there has to be some financial kind of incentives, it would seem, right? So whatever that means, maybe it's government, maybe it's state, but you know, there has to be financial return in order to make these things happen in a big way. And we see that in many, many areas of medicine and healthcare. And so I'm not saying it can't happen. I think it can. I think it's going to take money from various people, including these government, as I said, but maybe foundations, things of that sort that are going to step forward and help to drive things in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that finances, I think, right or wrong, tend to drive things. And if we can, you know, I don't know how you show that it makes good financial as well as care sense to sort of put money towards health equity. But yeah, I would agree that I think finances is a big piece. Pinar, do we have a few more? I think I saw some come across.
Yeah, there is just one comment from Mary McCarty from the Office of Technology Commercialization, mainly referring to Marta. Marta, you could read it too. I wanted to make sure what she meant by the abbreviations she used, but I'll just leave that to you, Marta, to comment on it.
So Mary is wonderful. She's my primary contact through Techcom and the Discovery Launchpad, and clarified that they have established targets within Techcom, particularly for the business. The BAG is the business advisory group that they really want to increase minority and gender participation by 100%. We have a large group, so it's a big goal, and a 25% increase in those coming in through Techcom. So the team's definitely targeted, which is great.
Siata, if you have a minute, one other question that I have and this is sort of when Siata and I started discussing and collaborating on these ideas and how we can, you know, bring awareness to this topic. I mean, it's such a big space, and really sort of thinking about it a lot, thinking with some of the stakeholders that I listed, other institutes at TU. You know, there's the entire innovation space where we need to diversify funding to underrepresented groups and create more participants. Then there is the workforce space in medical technology, where you need to understand challenges to create more diverse and inclusive workforce in medical technology and life sciences companies and create solutions. And then there is the leadership space, where promote more diverse senior leaders. And there's the product space, and maybe that, you know, relates to one of the participants, like patients and the products that match the patients, and making the products more patient-centric and representing that diversity. And then there's the entire global perspective. And if Marta, Kathy, Kwame, if you could maybe guide Siata and me in terms of these different levers and in which lever should we focus more? And I mean, and it's kind of interesting, like where the barriers are most, but also where the opportunities are the biggest as well. If you could get some of your thoughts. Maybe it's a little selfish question, but in terms of wanting to get your broad feedback on this.
Well, I'll start. I think I'll be a little bit of a broken record, but from my standpoint, focusing on capital at all stages, even that is a lot to focus on. But as Kathy was mentioning, managers that are managing a $5 million fund, and then there are people who are managing a $250 million fund, and there are needs across the different stages. That's one. And then someone chatted about the business case. Getting as many AvaMed company CEOs to really buy into the principles, to incentivize and turn into action those principles that they just promulgated. And that's something that if you're a member of AvaMed, whether you're a member of a cell, the small business component, or on the board of the larger AvaMed, just pushing to turn that into action, I think is another major lever that could be pulled.
So, I mean, Pinar, your question is overwhelming almost, right? Because it's so big. But I think one thing it points out, though, is that there are so many ways to enter this space, and that's exciting. And I would actually say, too, that beyond what you just said, what's I think really also exciting is the ability to enter this space from the from the data side, from the software side, from the, from public health side. And so I think that where it used to be probably a little more, you needed to be a biomedical engineer or something like that, which is not up everyone's alley by any means. It's not mine. It's more open today, I think, than ever, and more exciting, in fact, I think, than ever too. So I think there are ways you can come at it from a lot of places, and I think that's actually going to be helpful to get more people in the field too.
That's a fantastic point, and I think some of the conversations Pinar and I have been having, with some of our university colleagues and supporters, and trying to make relationships, that concept has come up, right? Just letting people know that there's multiple ways that you can get into this space so that they can see that this is a potential option, sort of recognizing that they may not have the desire, the skill set to do it from a engineering side, but they can come at it from another avenue and still be a very good and very powerful participant in it.
We have one more minute. If you have one more minute for one last question, which is, what advice do you have for aspiring medtech leaders of color that are interested in getting into the post-market side of the device industry, specifically sales and marketing roles?
I would say join MedTech Color. That's my advice. In all seriousness, it's the classic. It sounds like you're in a medium to large size organization. I don't have anything earth shattering other than to recommend building relationships with people in a position to sponsor you. And sometimes to grow, this is classic corporate advice, but to grow, sometimes you have to move. And sometimes you have to move out the organization to another big organization to get your value recognized. So it comes down to sponsors, not mentors, sponsors. And sometimes being willing to move, to me.
Yeah, in fact, almost always being willing to move, probably, right? Yeah. These jobs, they're everywhere, and they require that kind of mobility oftentimes. So, but it's a great way to enter the business.
And to kind of add on to that, I think you can find, even within that space, a variety of different ways to capitalize on your education or previous work background. I mean, you can go in through inside sales, customer service, tech services if you have a clinical background, and demonstrate your ability to interface really effectively with customers and the product development and product management teams, and then take that step and say, I want to move into the sales side. So there are a variety of different ways. Fortunately, in the larger companies, there are a variety of different channels and paths. But you're right. Sometimes you have to take a step outside to go into a different organization where you can find that opportunity.
So thank you. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. This was phenomenal. I'm humbled by the amount of experience on this panel, and thank you for sort of going through this with us. The key things I heard is networking, being flexible, being willing to be mobile and maybe moving. Financing is one big gap, or capital is a big gap or barrier to sort of really operationalizing diversity and inclusion, that it does really require some action, and capital is kind of that big gap. So thank you for spending time chatting with us today. I really do appreciate it. And I probably will send a little note, try to collate some of these ideas and see if I can have that, available to people if they weren't able to keep up with the notes, and just to be able to provide some of that data back to folks. So thank you again. Pinar, do you have any other closing words or anything?
No, it's just that it's been an honor to host you, and really looking forward to engaging with you as both MILI and Society of Physician Entrepreneurs with Seattle's group, as well as the other institutes at the University of Minnesota, Medical Devices Center, also Techcom, Home Center, as well as the Institute for Engineering and Medicine, where we, faculty and staff together, can keep working on these ideas and making things better and improve diversity and inclusion in this space. Thank you so much.